Hi, I will be your teacher for today, and let me introduce to you myself. My name is Teacher Minerva, and our topic for today is all about the elements of plot. In this lesson, on this certain topic, we are going to focus on the plot structure. Into the discussion, let us first read the students' objectives. So first, students will review the characteristics of the literary elements of the plot. The students will demonstrate an understanding of the plot structure by applying term in the familiar context. And at the end of this lesson, the students will use a plot diagram graphic organizer to present their analysis of plot structure. This is on the assessment at the last part of our discussion. So now we're going to discuss the elements of the plot. So, plot is arguably the most important element of a story. It is literally the sequence of events, and in that sequence, we learn more about the characters, the setting, and the moral of the story. In a way, the plot is the trunk from which all the other elements of a story grow. Let's explore how the plot of a story unfolds. We'll see how you can formulate your own plot points and enjoy some examples from literary stories. So going back. Even though the plot is an essential element in a story, there are some stories that have specific plot structure that most stories follow. So, in fact, there are five main plot elements to be aware of. Okay, the first element is the introduction. I have here a diagram. Everybody can see it. Okay. This is the example of a plot structure. The first part of a plot is the introduction. In the introduction, this is the start of the story where we meet the main characters or some characters, understand the setting, and deduce the conflict. In some stories, they present already the conflict into the introduction. For example, I will give an example of an introduction in the story. For example, we might meet a main character named Fiona who just moved to Ireland and is writing her first book. There, we meet the main character, understands she's in a new country, and will watch her push to overcome the trials and tribulations that come from each of these new elements. So in that certain example, we see the main character, which is Fiona, the place, and maybe some sort of story gives the conflicts on the introduction. And then the second part, that's why in my plot structure here, there is a conflict. Okay, the second part or the second element of the plot is the rising action. The rising action. In the rising action, we watch a series of events unfold. There's not much in a story if everything works out perfectly and there are zero bumps in the road. So we need a little conflict. So some stories put their conflict over this in the rising action or before the rising action. So conflict can come in many forms. Continuing with Fiona, the first example in the introduction, we're going to continue in her story. So, Fiona, perhaps she's battling some sort of internal conflict. We might see her doubt her decision to move so far away from home. Or, with regard to her book, Perhaps she submits it to her agent and it's torn to shreds. Or maybe she meets something devilish Irish lad who distract her from her primary purpose and must realign her priorities. And these are some possibilities of a rising action of our story that we have in the introduction. Okay, third elements of the plot, the climax. This is the peak of the action. At this point, we've watched the main character confront the action or the conflict, and now something major has to come to head. Perhaps, and the example or choose Fiona. Perhaps Fiona makes a new acquaintance who takes on a motherly role, reducing those feelings of doubt about moving so far away from home. So perhaps she submits the revised version of her book and it's accepted. Or maybe in our way around, she tells the devilish lad she's not interested, so she focuses on her work. So just as there are many avenues for action and conflict, there are many ways to bring a story to a climax. This will be the moment that stirs up the strongest sense of emotion in the reader. So we're going down to the falling action of the plot. Here, the falling action. In the falling action, we see things start to wind down. That's why it said falling action, because everything starts to wind down. Okay, let's go back to Fiona and her new motherly acquaintance might have settled into a steady rhythm of Sunday dinners by now. As for her book, maybe the only thing she's waiting for is the advance copy, or perhaps the devilish lad has come back around and there is a steady relationship. So going to the last part of the plot, which is the resolution. In any story, it is important to conclude with a solid resolution, sometimes called the denouement. Okay, sometimes a resolution is called the denouement of the story. Here, we learn of the final outcome of the story. The short story in particular need a defined ending. Books, however, can remain somewhat open-ended, but you must bring the story to a close with either a tragic or a happy ending. So, going back to Fiona, perhaps Fiona is purchasing a crumbling mansion in Ireland with the royalties from her book, or maybe she'll move back to her home country, cherishing her Irish adventure for what it was. Or either way, readers want to experience some sort of finite conclusion. For summary, for the concluding part of our lesson, introduction, we're gonna see the main character, the setting, or maybe the conflict in the introduction on some stories. And in the rising action, this is the start of a series of events where the story is building up to a new dimension or a rigid road, or the bumps of the road of the story. And up to the climax, it is the peak of the action, meaning there is something confrontation of the action and the conflict. And then the falling action, this is the conflict is starting to resolve. The start of the wind down of the conflict, and then the resolution, which is sometimes called denouement, is the conclusion of the story, the end, or it might be a happy ending or a tragic ending. Now, I hope you learned something in this lesson, the plot structure and the assessment or the for the activity. Search for a story or a short story on the internet. I will suggest here and make a plot. Identify the introduction of the story, the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and the resolution of the story for your practice or for your assessment. I hope you learned something new today. Thank you for watching, and your teacher Minerva will signing off. Bye bye.